If you've ever been just mindlessly scrolling through your feed and you pause on a video of an animal that just looks, I don't know, wrong.
Oh, yeah, the brain glitch.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. That exact glitch. Like, you know the one I'm talking about. You're looking at a dog standing next to a standard 6-foot fence, but the dog's head is literally hovering a foot above the wood.
Right.
And your brain just scrambles to make sense of the scale, right? Because you're trying to process why someone put a collar on what is, mathematically speaking, a bear.
Yeah, that mental glitch is, it's actually a really fascinating failure of visual anchoring.
Visual anchoring.
Yeah, so we navigate our entire physical reality using these deeply ingrained spatial references. Like we have this hardwired biological baseline for, how much space a predator should take up or a
Yeah.
companion animal.
Right, like a dog should be knee-high, maybe waist-high.
Exactly. And when a creature violates that internal algorithm, it triggers this sudden wave of cognitive dissonance. It basically forces the brain to dump all its assumptions and recalculate the threat level entirely from scratch.
I felt that exact recalculation looking through the footage for today's deep dive, honestly, because we are looking at a compilation of some of the largest animals ever caught on camera.
It's some wild footage.
It really is. But I want to bypass the whole freak show, viral spectacle aspect of this today, because gawking at big things gets old fast, right?
Yeah, it's just a spectacle at that point.
Right. The real question is the engineering behind the scale.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why does nature, or, well, in some cases, human intervention, push biology to these massive extremes?
Right.
Are we dealing with localized evolutionary miracles, prehistoric remnants, or heavily manipulated genetics?
Well, the thing is, size is never arbitrary in biology. It's just not.
Mm-hmm.
It is always a highly specific adaptation to some environmental pressure.
So it's always purposeful.
Always. Gigantism is essentially a biological ledger. It reveals the very specific equations of survival or reproduction or artificial selection that governed that creature's whole development.
So if you're listening and you want to understand the invisible forces shaping the giants that walk, swim, and fly around us, stick around. You will never look at one of those viral, massive animal videos the same way again.
Definitely not.
Let's dive straight into the creatures that evolved in such isolation they essentially became living myths. And the shoebill stork is the perfect starting point.
Oh, man. The shoebill.
Calling it a bird feels totally inadequate.
It really does.
It operates more like an animatronic predator left over from an abandoned theme park. I mean, it stands 5 feet tall, has an 8-foot wingspan, and the beak is this 8-inch solid wooden-looking shoe.
Yeah, it looks fake.
It does. And on top of that, it communicates by clattering its bill to sound indistinguishable from heavy machine gun fire. It's a nature jump scare.
It is. But, the shoebill is this brilliant modern window into the theropod dinosaurs.
Yeah.
That massive wooden-looking beak isn't just for show.
Right.
It's a highly specialized execution tool.
Execution tool. That's terrifying.
Yeah, well, the shoebill relies on an ambush strategy in the dense papyrus swamps over in East Africa. So it will stand completely immobilized in muddy water for hours.
Just waiting.
Just waiting, utilizing its massive size to store potential energy. And then when a lungfish or even a juvenile crocodile surfaces, the bird essentially triggers a controlled collapse of its entire body weight forward.
Wait, so it's not just pecking at it, it's using gravity and its own body mass as a weapon.
Precisely the mechanism, yeah.
Yeah.
The sheer kinetic energy of a 5-foot bird just collapsing its mass behind a sharp, heavy bill, it crushes the prey instantly.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an evolutionary design where extreme size enables a hunting style that requires, zero sustained pursuit.
That terrifying efficiency makes me think about our historical relationship with scale, honestly. Like, we look at modern massive primates, orangutans, pushing 250 pounds and standing over 5 feet tall.
Right.
But then you look at the fossil record of Gigantopithecus, which is this extinct ape from Asia that stood 10 feet tall and weighed over 1,200 pounds.
Yeah, a true giant.
When I see those numbers, I start to wonder if cryptid myths, things like Bigfoot or the Yeti, aren't just imaginary monsters, but maybe a collective, lingering psychological trauma from early humans having to actually share territory with 1,000-pound primates.
Well, the timeline of early hominids and Gigantopithecus actually does overlap, particularly in Pleistocene Asia. So imagine a prehistoric human, accustomed to being relatively dominant.
Right, walking around thinking they own the place.
Exactly, and suddenly they encounter a 1,200-pound bipedal or semi-bipedal ape in a dense bamboo forest. I mean, the sheer volume of that creature would permanently alter the cultural memory of those human populations.
It would be trauma.
Total trauma. Myths often serve as the oral history of ancient predators. But the existence of Gigantopithecus also points to an environment with a staggering carrying capacity.
Meaning there was just a lot of food.
Yeah, you don't get a 1,200-pound ape unless there is an overwhelming year-round abundance of high-calorie vegetation to sustain that metabolic furnace.
Which perfectly explains why they died out when the climate shifted and those massive forests shrank. The environment dictates the size limit.
Exactly.
I suppose that's why the most extreme examples of gigantism are found in the ocean then.
Oh, absolutely.
The footage of that 12-foot giant squid swimming near the surface is just wild, especially when you realize it's just a juvenile.
Right, just a kid.
Full-grown adults can surpass 40 feet. It's incredibly easy to see how a sailor, seeing a 40-foot tentacled mass, would return home with stories of the Kraken dragging ships to the abyss.
That giant squid is basically the quintessential example of abyssal gigantism. Because in the deep ocean, the normal rules of biological growth are completely suspended.
How so?
Well, you have near-freezing temperatures, which drastically slows down an animal's cellular metabolism, and that effectively extends its lifespan and allows for continuous prolonged growth.
So they just keep growing.
Yeah, combine that with massive hydrostatic pressure and a lack of traditional high-speed visual predators, and evolution just removes the standard brakes on size.
The environment literally takes the ceiling off their potential mass. That is so cool.
It really is.
But let's pivot, actually, from how human folklore processes these giants to how the wild deals with them. Because sheer scale totally rewrites the predator-prey dynamic.
Oh, completely.
Take the giant anteater in the Brazilian wetlands. There's this incredible footage of an 8-foot, 140-pound anteater being stalked by a massive male jaguar.
I've seen this, yeah.
The jaguar creeps in, clearly evaluating a strike, and then simply gives up and walks away. This completely breaks the traditional idea of an apex predator for me. I mean, the anteater has absolutely no teeth.
None.
How does a toothless mammal force an apex cat to just back down?
It really comes down to caloric economics and risk assessment. Predators operate on an incredibly thin margin of error.
Right.
A jaguar relies on explosive power to secure high-calorie meals with minimal personal injury. So the anteater might lack teeth, but that 140-pound frame is essentially armor-plated with dense, fibrous skin.
Like wearing Kevlar.
Exactly. And more importantly, its forelimbs are biomechanically engineered to rip apart concrete hard termite mounds.
So a defensive swipe isn't just a scratch, it's a structural threat.
Oh yeah, a direct hit from claws designed to shatter baked clay will easily snap a jaguar's jaw or sever an artery. And in the wild, a predator with a broken jaw is a dead predator.
Game over.
Yeah, so the jaguar's internal calculus basically concludes that the kinetic energy and the extreme mortal risk required to penetrate the anteater's defenses, it just offers a terrible return on investment compared to, say, hunting a capybara.
Wow.
The anteater's size and specialized anatomy serve as a highly effective biological deterrent.
Caloric economics is such a brutal filter, and it's the exact same logic playing out with the giant otters, isn't it?
Yes, very similar.
Because the footage of a solitary 6-foot, 75-pound giant otter suddenly flanked by 2 jaguar sisters is incredibly tense.
Oh, it's terrifying.
But instead of fleeing into the water, the otter vocalizes, and its entire family, the raft, just shows up.
They roll deep.
They really do. They synchronize their movements and drive 2 apex predators out of their own territory. There's a reason locals call them water jaguars.
Right, well, the giant otter scenario introduces a different variable, which is collective mass and synchronized aggression. A single 75-pound otter is formidable, sure, but when a raft of 6 or 7 adults forms a defensive wall, the jaguars are no longer looking at one prey item.
They're looking at a mob.
Exactly. They are facing 400 pounds of highly coordinated, aggressive muscle equipped with crushing jaws. And the otters also use acoustic warfare, emitting these deafening alarm calls that totally disorient predators.
So the jaguars just do the math again?
Yeah, they're forced to recalculate their calorie math on the fly, and the collective size of the raft makes the math impossible to justify.
It's fascinating how nature uses size to just casually opt out of the food chain. But sometimes massive size isn't about defense at all, right? Sometimes it's about pure, violent competition.
Right.
Like the red kangaroo. That completely blew my mind. We are talking about the largest marsupial on Earth, 6.5 feet tall, weighing 200 pounds, and exhibiting a physique that rivals professional bodybuilders.
They're massive.
The footage of Roger, that sanctuary kangaroo who went viral for crushing a galvanized metal bucket with his bare paws, is alarming. Why on earth does a herbivore need to look like it spends its life in a gym?
That hypermuscularity is driven entirely by sexual selection. In red kangaroo social structures, mating rights are secured exclusively through physical dominance.
So they fight for it.
Brutally, the males engage in sustained combat, and their physiology is uniquely adapted for this. When they fight, they utilize pentapedal locomotion.
Meaning they use their tail as a fifth leg?
Yes. The tail is incredibly robust, composed of dense muscle and reinforced vertebrae. Yeah. So during combat, a male will plant his tail on the ground, leaning his entire body weight back onto it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which frees up both of those massive hind legs to deliver simultaneous, devastating kicks.
I read somewhere that those hind legs act like giant biological springs, storing kinetic energy in the Achilles tendons, so when they release that tension in a kick, it could easily disembowel a rival.
That elastic strain energy is exactly what makes them so lethal, and the sheer mass of their upper bodies is built through their slow-moving grazing habits.
How does eating build muscle?
Well, they pull their hindquarters forward while supporting their weight on their front limbs, essentially performing thousands of weighted push-ups every single day.
That is insane.
Evolution has turned them into specialized fighting machines where absolute size and physical power are the sole currencies for passing on genetic material.
That makes perfect sense for wild animals. Size solves the problem of predators or rivals. But I want to shift the focus, actually, to what happens when human beings grab the evolutionary steering wheel.
Ah, yeah, domestication.
Right. Domesticated giants really blur the line between functional breeding and biological extremes. We have the farm titans, like Zeus the Shire horse, standing 6.5 feet at the shoulder and weighing nearly 3,000 pounds.
Bred for immense draft work.
Exactly. But then you look at Aragon, the Belgian blue bull, and I really struggle with the ethics of this. I understand the argument that engineering a hypermuscular cow is just, maximizing biological efficiency to feed a hungry planet. Isn't this just the ultimate optimization of a food source?
Well, the optimization argument is valid from a purely industrial standpoint, but it ignores the severe physiological toll on the organism itself. The Belgian blue's appearance isn't the result of selective breeding for health.
What is it then?
It's the exploitation of a specific genetic anomaly. They have a mutation in the myostatin gene. Myostatin is a protein that basically acts as the biological brake pedal for muscle growth. It signals the body to stop producing muscle tissue once it reaches a functional size.
So we basically identified the brake pedal and intentionally severed the brake line.
That is an incredibly accurate way to phrase it, yeah. The muscle growth remains largely unchecked, resulting in what's called double muscling. But this extreme industrial breeding pushes the animal way past the boundaries of natural viability.
Because they get too big.
Yeah, the calves are often so disproportionately muscular in utero that natural birth becomes structurally impossible. It requires routine surgical intervention C-sections just to deliver them.
That's awful.
When a species requires an operating table to reproduce, we have sacrificed basic biological function at the altar of industrial yield.
It's such a stark contrast to historical functional breeding. Like, look at the domestic guardian breeds. The Caucasian Shepherd, famously exemplified by that viral dog Godzilla, right. Or the Tibetan Mastiff, which literally looks like a 300-pound lion. Those dogs were bred over centuries to guard high-altitude monasteries and nomadic livestock from wolves and brown bears.
Right.
Their size is a direct response to a lethal job requirement. They needed the mass to survive an encounter with wild apex predators.
The distinction there is vital. A Tibetan Mastiff's size serves an active, functional purpose that doesn't compromise its basic physiological ability to exist. But there is a hidden underlying requirement for all these domestic giants, from a 3,000-pound Shire horse to a 7-foot-tall Great Dane, or even Jimbo, that 1,400-pound captive Kodiak bear who famously cuddled with his caretaker.
Right, they all have a remarkably docile temperament. They're all gentle giants.
And that gentleness is a strict biological mandate for domestication. Think about the adrenaline and cortisol pathways in a wild predator. If early humans bred a 3,000-pound draft horse that somehow retained the reactivity, anxiety, or territorial aggression of a wild stallion, it would be a lethal liability. You cannot safely stable a creature that massive if it possesses a hair-trigger fight-or-flight response.
So in order to scale up the hardware, we absolutely had to rewrite the software.
Exactly. We had to heavily select for reduced neural crest cell development, which naturally dampens adrenal responses and promotes tameness. We selectively bred the aggression out of the giant so we could utilize its physical power without becoming its victim.
Which brings a really interesting vulnerability into the picture, I think, because whether a giant is shaped by natural selection or human engineering, immense size carries a massive hidden cost.
It does.
It seems like the bigger the animal, the faster it falls apart when the world around it changes. Like, I'm looking at the giant freshwater stingray found in Cambodia's Mekong River, 720 pounds, 13 feet across, hidden in river mud.
The Mekong stingray is a masterclass in trophic dynamics.
I look at a creature that massive in a river system, and to me, it's like a biological skyscraper.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, because a 720-pound predator can't exist in a vacuum. Just like a skyscraper needs a massive, unbroken supply chain of electricity, water, maintenance, and smaller businesses just to keep the lights on, that stingray needs millions of smaller fish,
Right.
which need billions of insects, which need pristine water. If the river's supply chain breaks, the skyscraper empties out first.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize the energy transfer. Because in ecology, we look at the 10% rule. Only about 10% of the energy from one trophic level transfers to the next level up.
Wow, just 10%.
Yeah, so to maintain the basal metabolic rate of a 720-pound stingray, the foundational ecosystem must be wildly abundant and structurally intact. The sheer presence of that animal proves the river is healthy.
It's the canary in the coal mine.
Exactly. But conversely, the moment industrial pollution, damming, or overfishing degrades that environment, the giants simply cannot balance their caloric checkbooks. They are the first to vanish because the ecosystem can no longer afford their biological rent.
The vulnerability of extreme adaptation is honestly heartbreaking, especially when you look at something like the pangolin.
Oh, the bang.
Here is a mammal carrying specialized keratin armor, complete with a 16-inch sticky tongue for raiding ant colonies. When a lion or leopard attacks, the pangolin just rolls into an impenetrable sphere of sharp scales. It's a flawless evolutionary defense mechanism against teeth and claws.
It was flawless for millions of years,
Mm-hmm.
but it highlights the tragedy of an evolutionary mismatch. And adaptation is only successful in the context of the specific pressure that created it.
Right.
The pangolin's armor is useless against a poacher with a bag. The human hand simply picks up the defensive sphere.
It's the most trafficked mammal on Earth, entirely because people falsely believe those keratin scales, which, by the way, are the exact same biological material as our own fingernails. They think they have medicinal properties.
It's devastating.
We took an evolutionary masterpiece and turned it into a fatal flaw just by changing the threat. But on the flip side of that human influence, you have something like the Gambian pouched rat.
A very different story.
Yeah, a 3-foot-long, 4-pound rat. Normally, human expansion means total extermination for rodents of that size.
Yet its immense size provided a larger olfactory bulb and the cognitive capacity for advanced trainability. Because it is large enough to handle, train, and harness, human organizations actually deploy them to sniff out unexploded landmines and detect tuberculosis samples in laboratories.
They literally secured their own survival by becoming highly specialized utility workers in the human world. It's an incredible symbiosis.
It perfectly illustrates how size can unexpectedly pivot a species from being viewed as a pest to being protected as an asset.
We've covered a massive spectrum today. We started with the kinetic violence of the shoebill and the deep-sea physics that created the kraken.
Yep.
We broke down the caloric economics that allow an anteater to stare down a jaguar and the elastic strain energy in a kangaroo's deadly kick. We explored the genetic manipulation of the Belgian blue and the mandatory gentleness of our domestic titans.
A lot of ground covered.
And finally, we looked at the fragile supply chains that sustain river monsters and the tragic mismatch of the pangolin's armor. So when you see these viral videos now, you aren't just looking at random supersized oddities. You are witnessing the very limits of biology being tested by environmental pressure, human interference, and ecological health.
And if we extrapolate those pressures into the future, we actually arrive at a rather provocative thought.
Oh, what's that?
Well, historically, giants required vast, isolated, resource-rich environments, like Pleistocene forests or the abyssal ocean. But those environments are rapidly vanishing, replaced by global urbanization. The selective pressures are shifting from pristine isolation to artificial abundance. We are creating massive heat islands filled with an endless supply of high-calorie human waste.
Oh, wow. You're talking about urban giants.
Exactly. Given enough evolutionary time, the concrete jungle might not eliminate gigantism, it might just change the cast. We could very well inadvertently engineer an entirely new breed of massive urban scavengers, hyper-adapted, supersized raccoons, pigeons, or rats that thrive exclusively in the shadows of our own skyscrapers.
150-pound raccoon raiding a dumpster is a terrifying but brilliant thought to end on. Nature is always running the calorie math, the variables are just changing. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning what you see, and we'll catch you next time.